Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in the Twin Cities, it's time for Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Radio. Now, here's your host.
And hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Radio. I'm John Ray, and folks, I've been looking forward to this one. Sandy Hansen-Wolff is with us, and she is a business coach and a Sherpa, right? For business leaders and their business owners and their businesses. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, John. It's always a humble pleasure to be a part of these programs.
Well, you're on these programs because you do great work. So let's talk about the work you're doing. How are you serving business owners out there?
Well, yes, I'm happy to talk about that always. It's obviously my number one passion. So I started in business coaching and leadership, high-level leadership coaching, and actually being a speaker about 15 years ago already. And it came at a time where I basically said yes when people asked. And I never really said, well, I'm going to start a coaching business or I'm going to start speaking on big and small stages or working with leaders or anything like that. And it happened because of me saying yes to situations as they arose. And basically because I was a business owner who took over a company when my first husband passed away. It was his company. So I took it over blindly and led it through a turnaround along with my great employees and dedicated customers at the time, and came in blindly and had to lead a turnaround from some financial pressure and changes in the industry. And I didn't classify myself as a turnaround person. I owned the company after he died, and thought, well, I'll have to figure it out in order to sell it. So here I go. So people saw that. They saw that I turned around a company in very turbulent conditions and then asked me to help them turn around their companies when 2008, 2009 started happening. Mm-hmm. And so it's just definitely been a passion to help business owners elevate their past, work, and now it's a lot with working with the overwhelm and burnout and, how do we create nearby lanes where we're not thinking, and developing the new pathways for companies now and getting out of the chaos.
I want to get back, if you don't mind, to that experience where your husband passed away. I mean, did you have business experience when this happened, or what was going on at this time? Take us through that, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, good question, and happy to share. I had gone to college for community development and city planning, basically, and worked for a nonprofit for most of my 20s, doing development type work. And looking back, and I'll still say this now, is I feel like every position we're in trains us for the next position. Mm. And so back then, the boss, my first boss, pushed me to lead community initiatives and to go pitch to economic development boards for projects when I was 21 years old. And fairly intimidating, but for the lack of a better word, that figure out ability under extreme pressure was something that she taught me early on, because we were a small nonprofit and didn't have staff to do everything we needed. And it served me really well when I came in blindly to that. So I never really considered myself an entrepreneur or a visionary or a business owner. And it was kind of something, I thought that it was something that was pushed or forced on to me. Now I realize that everything in life, we are at choice. I chose to do it. And and chose to be there for 18 years now and recently exited that particular company. So I've been doing the business coaching and consulting and speaking as a second business for all these years.
Well, let's talk to spouses, to others that have this issue thrust upon them, that you're just sitting there and you're dealing with the grief of your husband passing, of course, but you're also having to immediately deal with taking on this business. I mean, how do you, I guess, keep your wits about you, maybe for lack of a better way to put it? I mean, how did you cope with that stress?
Mm-hmm. Also a good question, John. I feel like it kind of resonates with a lot of what leaders are experiencing now.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously grief of losing someone is its own state of overwhelm and complete derailment on your life. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's many ways people grieve. And it's not just the loss of a person. A lot of leaders are really grieving now of the loss of business and life as we knew it. And so how do we cope? Sometimes we don't, is the honest answer to that people need to really hear and embrace for themselves. I think, people used to say, "Oh, Sandy, you're so strong." Like I could never have endured what you did. And my answer to that was, well, thank you. But we all, and then inside what I said out loud a few times, depending on who it was I was talking to, I'm like, you should see me at home. Because we go to work and we put on this, resilient hat and how we're so strong, when under the table in high pressure meetings or in bank meetings where bankruptcy looked imminent or closing down the business was an option, I'd be pinching my hand really hard under the table to avoid crying, kind of like to divert the pain that was going on in my heart, and just trying to keep it together. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that now, is that I'm just so exhausted, and we're doing tactics just to get through the day. But I think, in full transparency, breaking down and crying was a real thing that I did at home and in private.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you allowed yourself that. And so many people feel like you say, they've got to put up a strong front, and they don't allow themselves that, really, it's a relief, right, to let that out. Yes.
Well, and even in my speaking that I've done recently to high-level business groups or owner-type companies or, owner groups, different peer groups, the topic that comes up a lot now is resilience and leading when we're, worn out, when we're exhausted ourselves. And so how I've started a lot of those conversations in my speaking is with the disclaimer that crying and, and stating the state of how you are now with just full transparency is totally welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also normal, just normalizing getting our emotions out. And not surprisingly, there's been more crying leaders in the room than ever. And I think people just need that permission to be human. So it's just been such a thrill to, now be on the other side of it and helping other leaders go through this same thing. Because I didn't have anyone back then when we couldn't afford anyone to come in and counsel me or coach me.
Right. So, Sandy, I mean, is that the biggest challenge that you see right now as we look at, presumably we're coming out of a pandemic? I mean, but this with leaders and I guess trying to be resilient themselves and help their teams, is that the biggest problem you see, or what? Talk about how the experience you had translates into what you see today.
Yes. So I think embracing the massive amount of change that's happened in the last few years, pandemic and otherwise. It just kind of has, a lot of the businesses, they experience kind of like business growth as we know it, and things evolve and change. And all of a sudden, boom, they change really quickly. Or the industry changes and shifts really quickly. And sometimes it catches people by surprise and companies by surprise. So number one, managing all of the uncertainty of what's next. And we've gone from working on longer term plans to now executing on 1-year strategies or 2-year strategies, just going very short term, or even work with my leaders for 6 months, just to get them through what's next in the shorter term as we figure this out. So I think there is a new way and a new paradigm of doing business that's here to stay, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And so what does our business now, how do we redefine our business and how we lead our team and our staff? And so dealing with all of that. And then also, obviously the great resignation of 2021, as it's been called, is there's a lot of our world that's rethinking what they want with their life and their career. And how do we manage that mass exodus, or dealing with what are we going to be, sidelined with next that we didn't see coming. But then above that is, just complete exhaustion. Leaders have been pushing for 2 years to really manage through this. So what I love is how do we unhitch the energy of the last 2 years that we've been dragging with us and start from now and look going forward? Because that actually ends up realigning people on a lot of levels of, I don't need to carry these old stories with me anymore. And I realize I have them.
Maybe this is a good spot, Sandy, for us to talk about intuitive strategy blueprint. Intuitive, that's what you term the work you do. So let's define that for everyone and how you use that to guide your clients.
Yes. So, I'd love to talk about it. And it's come out of 20 years of me leading my own larger company and actually the coaching work I've done. So I'm trained as an executive coach and licensed with the International Coaching Federation. And until just recently, I would do the, more of the common or assumed ways that you do business coaching, like you're setting goals and so on. And what I realized, and I also have, I love metaphysics, always have, how does who you are as a person and your own energy show up, and either derail or help your goals, whether it be personal or professional. And as a part of, just business is reigniting and kind of telling the truth, I've actually just become very unapologetic and forthright with, I do intuitive strategy work. I'll do intuitive sessions as a part of business building. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I just started this intuitive strategy blueprint is I took my 3 simple steps of how I work with either, the owners of the company or the executive team or whatever it is. First of all, assess where we are. What stories are we telling ourselves? What are the conditions that we're facing? What are the challenges we're facing? And kind of just put it all out on the table in a very confidential. And actually, that's not just all of the things that aren't working. It's all the things that are working too. What are we most proud of? So kind of just what's the state of the state? And the next part is, so it's 3 simple steps: assess, and then do a visioning session with either that. A lot of times it's a business owner or a key team or a leader looking to transition. So the next part is the visioning session. And then from there, it's goal setting. And so that's the 3 steps, which don't sound any different than normal strategy. However, what I do is in the visioning session, I have them go into the future more or less like a utopian state. Like, what does our company, or what does my life, personally, if I'm working with one person one-on-one and high-level coaching, what does my life in total look like? My roles, my business, personally. And I have them do a visioning to the future session. And what that does is it puts them in a future state where they can just dream again of what does perfection look like, knowing that perfection's not achievable. And so then we do that as the second step. And the reason I do that is once we can unapologetically look at like, well, what would utopian mean for me? And how would my business look different if like I was just fully alive and everybody was fully alive and flourishing? Because it releases the conditions now.
Mm-hmm.
And it just helps us just really think really broadly again and go into that, what is the next levels that I'm not seeing. So it helps people like just come alive again and companies come alive. And from there, what happens is total alignment. Because when they're in a utopian state, they're really mining into their passion. And so like my intuitive side, so I'll go into that space with them and I'll be like, well, what could this business look like if it was, flourishing again or whatever? But what I'm trying to do, or the goal is to mine it out of the people because they already know intuitively, like it's basically, intuition, whatever you want to call it, gut instinct. The times that we really go on the wrong path was when we just use our brain logic to trump like, oh, this doesn't intuitively or gut instinct align with how I'm feeling about it. So when we can feel right about it and we can really feel our goals being in alignment with where we can see things going. Mm-hmm. And then we go back to third step of, okay, now that we've kind of explored and felt out the future vision and we can sense that it's aligned, let's make goals from there. And I have to tell you, John, the results, sometimes I sit at my, if we're doing it virtually, I get, I'll get goosebumps because it just is, it's almost magical, the fast track that we can go down. Because now it's whether it's one person or a team, all of a sudden you have complete alignment and you have your passion back and you can easily identify. It's almost like confidence rebuilt of that feels right. It sounds right. In my brain, it makes sense, but in my gut instinct, it makes sense too. Well, then you're not going down a path of like, well, I knew that was not the right strategy in the beginning. And we went down that path anyway. It costed me a lot of money. The results were either epic fail or more vanilla in nature. And I always call it, I knew it and I blew it. Inflection point where, I could go back to a point in time where I felt that was wrong, but I went up to my brain only and said, logically, that should work. But I don't feel right about it for some reason, but I can't explain it. So let's just go for it. So it's just so imperative because leaders right now are on like, oh, I don't know which path we should go down. So it just grounds us back to certainty, to why we started this business in the first place. And it also points to a lot of areas that might need fixing. So I like those quantum leap type programs instead of longer term strategy.
Yeah. Wow. Sandy Hansen-Wolff is with us, folks. Sandy, what, I guess what, a couple things there that strike me as you describe that. I mean, you're teaching folks that it's okay to trust their gut, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. But how do you get us to that point when we've been through so many big events that make you question, right? And it's hard to do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the kind of environment that we've been in. So, I mean, how do you pull people along and get them to do that, to trust their gut?
Yes. So, good question, John. And I think, so like what I do is I start with, I call it my above the summit experience where, even when I do my new coaching contracts, we always start with at least a half day session.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is I want dedicated time, and I create an environment of safety, kind of. And I'll fall on the sword of my own trippings. People can relate to someone who has been there, who has been on complete burnout and exhaustion and complete overwhelm, not knowing what the next step is. And it's like, I get it. I was that person, and I was without resources. And so I'll put those disclaimers out there of, I was this person. There's zero judgment in this. And so first of all, I create an atmosphere of safety, of whatever you want to share or not share, it's up to you. And I'll tell you that when people come to the point or companies come to the point where it's like, let's create a new strategy, and they decide to work with me, they're usually excited about, let's get over this hurdle. And then, so like that's where my first part comes in, is like, let's just have a conversation and assess, like, where are we now? Where do we feel off? And once we realize, and the point of that, John, is when we realize, like, well, not everything has changed, like this story I'm telling in my head. Like, I'm still a capable leader, but we don't feel that way, because we feel like, like, what path do I go down now? Because as soon as we pick one, everything changes. And so actually having leaders own their own brilliance and see their brilliance again and kind of get their chutzpah back, and realize, like, I can do this. I've done it a million times. And even revisiting will tell me a time in the past when you've been under extreme pressure and you've had to make a decision. We forget where we've come from. And so just remembering is key to that. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Lots of places I could go with that, but that's so valuable. So thank you for that. I guess this may seem an obvious question after what people have already heard, but how do you feel like your coaching practice is unique? I mean, there's a lot of business coaches out there. What makes you unique relative to what else is out there and available for folks?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we all want to find our unique ability. And, I honor so many of my coaching colleagues and clients and consultants that I know personally or as a friend, and actually that I've worked with in my last companies. And so, my uniqueness, I think, is I get that there's a literal side of, well, we just can't be in this, what people would call like woo land of like, well, let's just, think about gut instinct and if something feels right or not. Like, some people are like, well, what do you mean by that? So like, I know that there's a literal business execution side, so I'm trained as an executive and leadership coach and certified that way. And so to me, my uniqueness is I really feel like the magic is, and I use magic as a term just because I like it, but I've also seen it where it's like quantum leaps can happen when we bring, like people talk about, well, passion and aligning passion and what is my passion, and that's all great. The strategy and the literal business side, and like, well, there's a do and an action part of this of like, it's not just motivational. You're like, even if I come in and like come do a keynote on being a resilient leader and regrouping, I always have it be interactory where it's like, okay, we can talk about this and dream this. What are the action steps you're going to take? So there's a literal goal setting and execution side mixed with, and we're going to make sure this aligns to feeling right as like the owner of the company or as the leadership team. So like that intersection of, like, does this intuitively or gut instinct or culturally align with actual strategy? That intersection is where I think the brilliance really comes out. And so that's what I like to mine out is both sides of that. So what I've seen with a lot of the strategy that we've done in the past for my company that I just sold last year was we kind of did more on the logical goal setting side and kind of forgot to ask the questions of, does this feel right for us? Being a people-centric company that is all about nurturing and taking care of customers and our teams too. So it's kind of like the intersection of everything is where the real quantum leaps can happen in success and profits. I saw it happen for us, and I want it to happen more organically and quicker for other companies. So
now, Sandy, you also mastermind peer groups. So talk about that work and talk about, maybe I'm sitting here listening to this interview, and what should I think about in terms of engaging you for one-on-one coaching versus mastermind?
Mm-hmm. So to me, really, John, it's a personal preference. The one-on-one coaching. So I have 3 platforms, basically: the one-on-one high-level leaders or owner type coaching for 1, and then 2 is the peer group, and 3 is my speaking and consulting work, like workshops and so on. And so one-on-one is for that leader that says, I want to do my own work first. Like I want to figure out where I want my company or where I want my path to go, and then and I'm more private. And maybe it's because they're just so busy that they don't want to be involved in a peer group where they meet for 2-3 hours a month. They would rather just do the individual work. Totally fine. I get it. Actually, if there's 2 things that I did right when I was in that level of ownership, when we could afford it, I did both. I hired a coach for myself. And I joined a high-level peer group. And those were the 2 things, the 2 decisions that I'd say move the needle over time the most. Mm-hmm. And so for those that, for the mastermind groups, those people are looking for this. So actually the mastermind groups I'll be starting now here in 2022, I'm actually going to incorporate one-on-one sessions with the peer group. Maybe quarterly or so on, so they'll still get that one-on-one experience. But the peer group is really synergistic. Like they can throw their same challenges on the table. And number one, it's very confidential. And we're all coming from the same point of view as we want to help each other grow our companies or our next level leadership. And so you have the synergy of 10 people or however many are in that group. Sharing your common vision and really wanting to elevate you. And so like, it's like the whole 1 + 1 = 3 concept of they not only have, my network, if they're working with me one-on-one, they now have synergies of all of the networks of everyone on the table, and it's around the table, and it's complete brilliance happening on multiples of levels.
Wow. Business coach, entrepreneur, speaker, Sandy Hansen-Wolff has been with us, folks. Wow, Sandy, what great words that you've offered today. And thank you for the great work you're doing. I can't imagine that there aren't some folks that want to connect with you after listening to this interview. So let's get them to the right point. How can they touch base with you and learn more?
Sure. Well, number one, happy to participate, John, and it's always humbling to. I love sharing my story, and I love sharing the work and igniting people to their best work. So, first of all, you can contact me via email, Sandy at sandyhansenwolff.com, and it's SandyHansenWolff.com, sandyhansenwolff.com. My website is under the same name. It's www.sandyhansenwolff.com, or they can reach out the old-fashioned way by phone. And my number is 320-241-9910. So to me, simple works, complicated never did in my business. And I try to instill the same in everyone I work with. So whatever method works for people.
That's
and LinkedIn, I have a profile there too. So any way people feel they want to connect, I'd love to chat.
Terrific. Sandy Hansen-Wolff, what a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Hey, folks, just a quick reminder that if you would like to see the entire show archive of Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Radio, one good way to get there is just go to minnesotabusinessradio.com. You'll see the whole show archive there. Great business leaders like Sandy and others we've had on the show. If you want to subscribe to the show, which I, of course, encourage, go to your favorite podcast app, search for Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Radio, and you'll find us. And if you've got a way to, on your app, some apps have it, some don't, give us a review. We love to get a 5-star review, and it's not about me or Business RadioX. It's about our great guests like Sandy who do great work. I think you've heard that today. And we want them to be found and celebrated. So if you could help us in that way, we'd appreciate it. So for my guest, Sandy Hansen-Wolff, I'm John Ray. Join us next time here on Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Radio.